morning, good morning, good morning. This is better than the last event I had to speak at in this room, because the last time, a few weeks ago, I spoke at an event here. They had a bar in the back, so there was nobody up front. It almost looked like church. Good morning, and thank you all for coming today. Really appreciate it. Artificial intelligence is a far-reaching and transformative technology that will impact how people work and socialize, how businesses operate and become more productive, even how we're going to have to provide for national defense. AI is already with us. It is improving healthcare, transportation, legal services, and many other parts of our economy. A recent McKinsey study estimated that AI will boost global economic input by $13 trillion by the end of this decade. Others, including PwC, have put that number at a higher level. To put that in perspective for a second, $13 trillion equals the economic output of China last year. And to think of it in another way, if you look at it historically, if you look at the technological advances in the 60s and 70s, fueling the productivity boom of the 80s and 90s, we're on the cusp of something like that, if not bigger. So AI is great promise, but it also presents great challenges as well. Given the global strategic importance of AI and its economic and societal impact, the moment demands leadership by nations that value innovation and individual rights. It is important to understand the benefits, uncover the issues, and where necessary, act. The Chamber believes that it is vital for government and the business community to work together to advance responsible AI. For this reason, over a year ago, the Chamber launched the Bipartisan Artificial Intelligence Commission on Competitiveness, Inclusion, and Innovation. This independent commission, chaired by former Congressman John Delaney and Mike Ferguson, and made up of top experts from government, academia, civil society, and business, held 5 field hearings, issued 3 requests for information, and received testimony from 87 witnesses, as well as meeting with government officials both here in the United States and abroad. The commission tackled many big issues. Excuse me, how do we foster innovation? Are existing laws sufficient for AI? Are new rules needed? If so, how should they be written? And how should a global framework come about? The Commission covers much of that ground in the recommendations and findings that are being released today. I want to thank both Congressman Delaney and Ferguson for taking on this massive effort and being truly bipartisan and independent thought leaders. I'd also like to thank the commissioners for their time, effort, and passion for developing these thoughtful recommendations. I also want to thank our CTEC team, especially to Jordan Crenshaw and Michael Richards for their leadership and dedication to seeing this through. Additionally, there are many other people within the Chamber who have had a lot of work to do with this, and want to thank them also. And really want to give a big shout out to Suzanne Clark, our CEO at the Chamber. Without her leadership, vision, and support, this would never have happened. That being said, now the hard part begins. The Chamber will build up our advocacy efforts around AI. We will educate policymakers and the public on the transformative role AI will play in virtually every industry, as well as the challenges that need to be addressed. We will advocate for the right policies here in the United States to enable ethical AI and ensure U.S. leadership. If policies are needed, they should come from the federal government. We also will support coordinated policymaking with the European Union and other allies. So this is a start, and there's going to be a lot more to come. Now, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome Elham Tabassi, who serves as Chief of Staff of the Information Technology Laboratory at the National Institutes of Technology and Standards. Elham led the development of the recently released congressional-mandated NIST AI Risk Management Framework. Elham also worked on the National Artificial Intelligence Resource Task Force, and the task force just released its final report to Congress in January. Elham has been at the forefront in advocating for the development of responsible AI, both within the United States and abroad. Elham, thank you for coming to the Chamber, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. Chairman Delaney, Chairman Ferguson, Jordan, Michael, thank you very much for having me. And also thank you, members of the U.S. Chambers Commission on Artificial Intelligence, Competitiveness, Inclusion, and Innovation. Delighted to be here and be part of this important event. As the federal laboratory with a mission focused on driving U.S. innovation and supporting economic security, NIST has a long-standing reputation in cultivating trust in technology. And we all agree that this work is critical in AI space to ensure public trust of this rapidly evolving technology. AI's huge growth and potential to transform our economy and society has made this an urgent priority for NIST and, of course, the nation. We believe that AI presents an opportunity to tackle the biggest issues of our time, strengthen our technological competitiveness, and be an engine for growth in nearly every sector of the economy. But we must be thoughtful, creative, and wise in how we address the challenges that accompany these new technologies. If we are not careful, and sometimes even when we are, AI systems can exacerbate biases and inequalities that already exist in society. AI risks and benefits can emerge from the interplay of technical aspects combined with societal factors related to how a system is used, its interactions with other AI systems, who operates it, and the social context in which it is deployed. These risks make AI a uniquely challenging technology to deploy and utilize both for organizations and within society. With proper controls, AI systems can without proper controls, AI system can amplify, perpetuate, or exacerbate inequalities or undesirable outcomes for individuals or communities. With proper controls, AI system can mitigate and manage inequality and benefit all of the people. AI risk management is a key component of responsible development and use of AI systems. Responsible AI practices can help align the decisions about AI system design, development, and use with intended aim and values. Core concepts in responsible AI emphasize human centricity, social responsibility, and sustainability. AI risk management can drive responsible uses and practices by prompting organizations and their internal teams who design, develop, or deploy AI to think more critically about context and potential or unexpected negative and positive impacts. Understanding and managing the risks of AI systems will help to enhance trustworthiness, which will in turn cultivate public trust. On January 26, NIST released AI risk management framework, directed by a congressional mandate and developed through a consensus, open, transparent, collaborative process with extensive engagement from organizations across private industry, academia, civil society, and government. This voluntary framework will help to develop and deploy AI in ways that enable organizations, the United States, and other nations to enhance AI trustworthiness while managing risks based on our democratic values. It should help to accelerate AI innovation and growth while advancing rather than restricting or damaging civil rights, civil liberties, and equity for all. Accelerating AI innovation and growth to maximize its benefits and minimize its potential harm is also the focus of the Commission report. And making this vision a reality is going to take all of us working together, and the time for action is right now. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you and congratulations for the report, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much for the kind words and the great partnership as well in working on the risk management framework. Introduce myself today. I'm Jordan Crenshaw, Vice President of the Chamber's Technology Engagement Center. I'm actually joined by our two co-chairs of the Commission. And I think one of the words that you just heard was trust. And in selecting our co-chairs, we wanted two people that we felt were trusted in Washington, D.C. to reach across the aisle, but also had a passion for innovation. They both actually have connections to the state of New Jersey, so that's a state of innovators. Edison, Bruce. I think they don't need too much introduction because I think their reputations speak for themselves. Former Congressman John Delaney, former Congressman from Maryland, is an innovator in his own right and has led the AI caucus in Congress. Mike Ferguson, former Congressman from New Jersey, worked on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which is responsible for the tech issues on the House side. And so both of them really have the experience and really have what it takes to have gotten us to the finish line to get this great report. So first of all, my thanks to you for leadership. But maybe what I can do is start off by, Congressman Delaney, let you start with why did you decide to take this up and why do you think that this is an important issue?
Well, first of all, Jordan, thank you for that nice introduction. Jordan said that they were looking for two people that they could trust in Washington, which is a very low standard, obviously. So we're glad we cleared that. But seriously, we really do appreciate, or I appreciate the Chamber creating the opportunity for us to do this good work, because it's important work. And obviously, the timing of the rollout of our report is actually good because everyone in the country is now focused on this issue. So I'm really grateful for the Chamber. I want to thank you for supporting this. I want to thank my co-chair, Mike Ferguson. We didn't really know each other before this. We immediately bonded over the New Jersey roots. I'm a Marylander now, but a big part of my heart is still in New Jersey. It was a privilege to work with you on this work, Mike. Elham, I represented NIST, I'm sorry, when I was in the Congress. And it's a singular institution, and so it was nice to hear your remarks this morning, so thank you for that. So Jordan, to your question, I've always believed that there's a strong correlation between innovation, whether it be mechanical innovation or more recently technological innovation, and the improvement in humankind. And if you look back across time, and if you look at outcomes that measure the condition of humans, poverty levels, healthcare outcomes, et cetera, there's a strong correlation. As we've embraced innovation, those things have improved. And it's clear to me, and I think it's clear to the Commission, and again, I want to thank all of our commissioners for their good work, that so too will be the case with artificial intelligence and machine learning. We heard wonderful testimony from around the country about the opportunities in drug discovery, advances in life sciences, making best practices in healthcare available to every physician in the country and eliminating healthcare inequality as a result, solving vexing problems in energy to allow us to tackle the climate crisis. We heard so many examples of how these technologies can allow us to make extraordinary progress and really leaps and solve problems that up until recently we thought were unsolvable. And that will result clearly in the improvement of the condition of human beings. But we also heard some cautionary tales, because while innovation is positive in general, it's not always positive for everyone at the moment in time that it's unfolded. And national security concerns were top of mind. Embedding biases that we've worked so hard to overcome as a society into these systems is a huge concern. Privacy, we've already surrendered too much privacy in the judgment of many Americans, that will continue with these systems. And obviously the massive disruption that could impact the workforce. Even though it's creating jobs, it is displacing them, and unfortunately the people who have their jobs displaced often don't get the jobs that are created. So thinking about the concerns and thinking about the opportunities and figuring out how to balance it is the job of policymakers. And I've always thought the best outcomes for society are achieved when the public sector and the private sector work well together. And what was so great about the work that the Chamber framed for Michael and I for this commission was this was going to be collaborative. We traveled around the country. We spoke to activists, we spoke to business leaders, we spoke to union leaders, we spoke to academicians, we talked to innovators and entrepreneurs at the front line, and I think resulted in a very good body of work that'll help guide policymakers in balancing those two aspects of innovation, the tremendous opportunity it presents with our fundamental responsibility to protect our citizens. And You know, so it was terrific work to do, and that's why I was so excited when you all reached out and gave me this opportunity. Congress.
Thanks, Jordan, and thanks, John. It was really, as John said, a delight for us to get to work together, especially since we didn't know each other. And it's not just New Jersey that we have in common, let's be honest. Will always be a New Jerseyan, but I happen to live in Maryland now. And love Maryland and love the great representation that Maryland sends to the Congress. And even if it's not quite as good as the representation they used to send to Congress. But you know, the other thing I think John and I have in common is, you know, if you have something really important that you need to get done in Washington, D.C., why not turn to two Irish guys? You know, we could have delayed this report a week and released it on St. Patrick's Day, Jordan, but I guess that was a bridge too far. I want to echo, first of all, some things that John said, very, very important and very, very powerful. But I think in the world that we've come from, and with public officials and politicians and trying to communicate with constituencies, what I have found, and I've loved watching over the years, I think some of the most effective public officials, elected officials, politicians are folks who can take complex topics and explain them simply to people to help them understand how it may or should or could impact their lives. And when I think about AI, I hearken back to not too long ago, a few years back when our kids were younger and growing up and learning. And this is as the internet was becoming more and more prevalent in our lives. This is when mobile phones and technology becoming more and more impactful in our lives, and we've seen that and how rapidly that has developed over the last couple of decades. But I used to say to my kids, when I talked about the internet or a mobile phone, it is an incredibly powerful tool. It's not a hammer, it's a chainsaw. And a chainsaw can be incredibly helpful to you when you have a tough task that you need to perform. You think about taking down a tree. That's a big thing. That's hard to do on your own with a less powerful tool like a handsaw, right? If you have a very powerful tool, you can do it much more quickly, much more efficiently. But you better use that chainsaw properly. You better know how to use it. You better be aware of the challenges that come with using a chainsaw. You need to do it safely so you protect yourself and others. But if you can do that, boy, that's a powerful tool that can help you do things more effectively, more efficiently, more quickly. And AI is very much like that. AI is an incredibly powerful tool. We're seeing it now. It's kind of bursting into public view, perhaps, in these last several weeks. But AI is an incredibly powerful tool for so many reasons, for so many uses that John and others have mentioned and we talk about in this report. But it needs to be used effectively. It needs to be used safely. It needs to have some guardrails. There needs to be some rules of the road, because without that, it can be an incredibly destructive tool if we don't use it properly and well. And that is really the goal of our report. We're so fortunate to have really some of the best minds anywhere on AI. Some of them are here today, others are not, but the commissioners on this commission, just incredible people with experience and knowledge and insights and instincts for what AI can offer to our country and to the world. And we know, and a lot of our conversations were guided by the fact that the United States has to be a leader here. We cannot cede the field. We know that other countries, particularly China, are investing heavily in AI and how it can give them an advantage, right? The United States has, for a long, long time, been the leader of the free world. We need to continue to do that, and this is a crucial, crucial part of the United States' leadership in the world, in our industry, for our education, for our military, in so many ways. The United States has to lead on AI. And that is really the underpinning of the reason the Chamber convened us a year ago. Once again, the Chamber, I think, showed great foresight and vision in recognizing this a year plus ago and saying this is something that the chamber, in its with its great convening power, needed to lead on, and they have done that with this commission. We were delighted to be invited to co-chair it. Delighted to have the commissioners, the incredible brain power that we had on this commission, and to hear from, as Tom said, nearly 90 witnesses in 5 different hearings across America and abroad. So it was a great opportunity, and I was delighted to be a part of it.
Thank you, Congressman. You can't spell chainsaw without AI, too. So,
Quick.
yeah, I think, for the folks that are in the room today, but we also have members watching on our live stream as well, I wanted to make it known that this report is truly independent. The chamber didn't tell the commissioners what to write. This is really the work of the commissioners and their independent analysis. We felt it was important that there be leadership established where it may not have been done so in other technologies in the past. Congressman, maybe I'll start with you. How did we get to the end product today of where we are?
So I think you framed the operating approach of the commission very well. This was not a top-down assignment. This was based on the chamber's desire and the desire that Michael and I had to reach out to all the stakeholders that are relevant to this discussion. We traveled around the country. I think our first event was in Austin, then Columbus, Silicon Valley, of course. We went to London. We did an event here in the United States. I'm in Washington. I missed a place, but we traveled extensively. We had testimony in something that was very similar to congressional testimony. Michael served in Congress a little longer than I did, so he was a little better at running the hearings than I was. But it was very much like a congressional hearing. The witnesses were represented all the stakeholders. As I said, we had business leaders, we had union leaders, we had activists, we had academicians, we had entrepreneurs, we had innovators, we had ethicists, we had physicians, we had people running large academic medical centers. We had all the stakeholders who AI touches, which was also one of the conclusions of our report, which is, while policy making is certainly needed and regulation is needed, it should be decentralized, because this is effectively animating every aspect of our society. And we have pre-existing frameworks in our government, and quite frankly, we have lots of pre-existing laws and regulations that can be applied to these new technologies. So that clearly came from our work, but it was bottoms up. The commissioners who, as Michael said, were very talented, and again, represented academia, represented the private sector, had experience in government, asked very good probing questions. We received testimony. We also received lots of written input, right, because there was an opportunity for people to comment even if they weren't at the hearings. And it was very much a bottoms-up process that evolved over a long period of time. And each of these hearings focused on a different aspect of our work. And I'm really proud of the product. And again, I think the Chamber, you all did a fabulous job orchestrating it, but not directing its outcome.
Any thoughts?
Yeah. It was refreshing, frankly, to, a lot of times in our congressional hearings, you kind of know what's going to happen, right? It's sort of like a preordained drama that you're just hoping everything goes according to a script. This did not have a script. This was a refreshingly innovative and sort of entrepreneurial process that the chamber said, look, go do this. Here's a group of talented people. Go listen. Go listen to the world. Go listen to what's going on in academia. Listen to what's going on in industry. Listen to what's going on with folks who specialize in a workforce, union organizations, ACLU. I mean, we heard from everybody, including policymakers who would join us occasionally. Very, very sort of interesting, not preordained process, and it was fantastic. We had topics that we wanted to hone in on. We wanted to see, how can we maximize innovation and also provide some guardrails. That was sort of something we knew was a goal of ours. How do we do it? Let's hear from people who really know what they're talking about. How do we best position the United States to maximize the benefits of disruption and minimize the downside of disruption to our workforce, for instance? How do we train people? How do we improve our education system to be ready for this new technology and what this means for our economy and for our workforce? And how do we lead internationally? How do we provide responsible leadership for the world? It falls on the United States to do that many times, and in an increasingly globalized world that we live in, that's even more important. Some folks say that's less important. I would argue it's more important for the U.S. to be able to provide that kind of leadership today, because the threats around the world are real. The benefits of AI, the potential benefits of AI are incredible, and they're real. The threats are also real. So hearing from folks in a very dynamic process was fantastic.
And Congressman, I think, go back to you. I think one of the things that I found, frankly, about this process so fascinating is we learned so much in so many different locations. Were there any things that really surprised you, or any key takeaways that you really found that really stuck with you throughout the process?
I guess one thing that I would say that I had not fully appreciated before this process was how AI touches everything. I mean, it is like water seeping into cracks and crevices. AI is involved or potentially involved in so many aspects of our lives. And we want to make sure that's going to be good, right? We want to make sure that's going to be constructive and helpful, and to encourage transparency, to encourage growth, right? To encourage the very best of our human nature, right? But like any powerful tool, and we see this in a sort of increasingly polarized world and country that we're living in, certainly here in Washington, we see the polarization. How do we also have the guardrails, the guidelines, the context to make sure that it is not feeding the worst of what may be going on in the world, that may be feeding discrimination, maybe feeding bias, that may be feeding disruption, which hurts people rather than helps people, right? We've seen that with other technologies. It's hard to do. It's a real challenge, but it is involved, AI is involved in so many different aspects of our lives and will continue to be more so. To me, it highlighted the importance of this work. It dawned on me a part of the way through the process. Holy cow, we got to get this right. We on the Commission need to get this right, but we as Americans, as the United States, in our government, in our industry, in our labor and workforce, we need to get this right.
No, I certainly agree with all of Michael's comments. I also left with a sense of optimism about how this will unfold. I'm an optimist by nature. I do believe children born this year are born into a better world than any child ever born in prior years, that the world does in fact get better with each passing year. And a lot of it is because of innovation. That doesn't mean there aren't challenges. There are very significant challenges associated with artificial intelligence. There is legitimate anxiety about how this will reshape the world in ways that we are not familiar with. But the thing that people have to remember, because they sometimes think about AI as immediately displacing all these jobs, or they think about AI in the Terminator scenario, where one day we'll wake up in this world of singularity and the computers will run everything. The thing that people have to remember is there's a million decisions that are going to be made, or millions of decisions are going to be made along the way about how this unfolds. It's not a linear trajectory without the opportunity for lots of intervention by policymakers and leaders in business and the nonprofit sector. And so when you look at the promise associated with AI, and when you look at the United States' relative advantages in this world, I would much rather have our hand than anyone else's hand. People talk a lot about how China has significant kind of comparative advantages to us in this world, specifically that they have a lack of privacy protections on their citizens. So in some ways, their very large population is kind of constantly being used to experiment on advances. We would not want that advantage. But the one thing that became clear in this work is that our main advantage, which is kind of the democratic, the liberal democracy that we have in this country, and I don't use liberal in a political context, but I mean it in the context of free speech, a rule of law, it is the only place where the best innovators can actually do their work. The best innovators and the best thinkers in the world only want to work in a liberal democracy, where their work is protected, where they can say what they believe, and where they have the freedom to express themselves and innovate. And those advantages really are singular in this battle for what nation will lead the next wave of technological innovation. And I left this work being kind of very optimistic about how well the United States is positioned, which doesn't mean we don't have a lot of work to do as these things unfold, and economic disruption and reimagining our safety net to address the disruption that will occur, and making sure we're investing in our workforce so that they're prepared, and dealing with privacy, which has already been compromised, in my judgment, too much, particularly for our kids, and thinking about how we're going to protect those. There's a huge amount of work to do. But you can certainly see how this ends in a very good place. And I think we felt very optimistic from this work we did.
No, very good points. And I think the last question I'm going to have is around the what's next. The Chamber is actually going to develop and roll out an AI leadership group very soon, so stay tuned on that. But we're also going to continue advocating based on recommendations in this report. But Congressman Delaney, the what next? What do you hope business does with this report? What do you hope policymakers do with this report? What are your thoughts there?
Well, look, there's a lot of, and just an example of policymakers and the bipartisan nature of this commission. We had, I think in Austin, Will Hurd kicked off our work, right? Former Republican member of Congress who I served with, who was in the intelligence. I think he was with the CIA, was an intelligence officer before coming to Congress. And then when we went to Silicon Valley, Ro Khanna showed up, Democratic member, economist by background, big thinker on how he represents Silicon Valley, big thinker on how to take the innovation in Silicon Valley and roll it out for the rest of the country so that that little part of the country isn't the only place that benefits from all this stuff. So I think look, it comes back to what we said in the beginning, which is I think this report is a very useful guide for policymakers. And there's a lot of good public policy being discussed and proposed in Congress and the administration. I know we have someone from the White House here, Nick. Thank you for joining us. You know, they're already thinking about these ideas. So I think this is a very good framework and a very good set of organizing principles and a set of recommendations to how to approach this in a decentralized kind of as necessary basis. But I also think business leaders, this is very useful for business leaders. And at the end of the day, what jumps out of the report is there needs to be collaboration between all of the stakeholders, the private sector, the government sector, you know, interest groups, the nonprofit sector. And we need to work together to solve these issues. That's true in every area of policymaking, by the way, in my opinion, and I know Michael shares that, but certainly here. So I think the what's next is, I'm hoping that this report serves as a very useful framework for Congress to do its job and to do some smart policy making, making sure they're taking input from the private sector and other stakeholders so that they balance this right. How do we allow the United States to compete and win and disproportionately, let's face it, get the jobs of the future here to make our economy strong and to fund all the priorities we have in our society? But how do we do it in a way that protects our citizens and the basic fundamental rights that we enjoy as Americans, that they're not compromised in this future, more pervasive technological world?
Jordan, could I just add one thing to that? That was really well said. As John and I know as well as anybody, the policymaking process on the Hill, there's always this inherent tension. Policymaking always lags behind what's going on in the real world. It tends to be reactive. It tends to be slow. Part of that is by design. Part of that is sometimes that is a very good thing, right? It's hard to make a law in America, right? It ought to be, because we all have to live by them. It shouldn't be something that can be done willy-nilly. But that is a challenge, and that beautiful design of our system is challenging in an increasingly fast-paced world where technology is constantly outpacing the policy process. So that tension needs to be recognized and addressed. And John's word that he hit on, which is exactly what I was thinking as he was talking about it, was collaboration. This collaboration between the private sector, between civil society and organizations that have expertise here or who have real stakeholders, are real stakeholders in this process, need to work in a collaborative way with the policymakers fast. They need to do it as quickly as possible, not being thoughtless, but that's part of the reason we did this, right? To help do some of that work, some of that spade work, that groundwork ahead of time, to give a head start to policymakers and the private sector and civil society and other organizations and stakeholders to get this process moving more quickly, because time is important here. Technology already outpaces the policymaking process. That can be a dangerous thing when you're talking about a tool as powerful as AI. So that collaboration needs to happen, and it needs to happen constructively and transparently and as quickly as possible to get to a thoughtful policy and other outcome process.
Well, thank you, Congressman, co-chairs, for your leadership. I want to ask folks to give a round of applause for our two co-chairs for their great work. We'll call up our co-chairs in just a few, along with the rest of our commissioners, for a few questions at the end. But what I'm going to go ahead and do is call up Michael Richards, who is our AI Policy Director here at CTEC, and the rest of our group will be the commissioners who helped draft the report. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Now it's the time to actually go through what the recommendations are of the report. I am honored to be up on stage today with three of our great commissioners who spent timeless effort and work on the final report and the recommendations and leading the thought leadership regarding the questions that they had through testimony, as well as questions that came through the request for information that they put out. So I think the way I want to start off is just go one by one as far as the different three major issues in which the report covers. So first starting with AI regulation, then go to workforce, and then finally go into global competitiveness and national security. So Adam, if you would like to go through the AI regulation portion of the report.
Sure. And I want to begin by thanking I want to thank Michael Jordan and the Chamber for inviting all of the commissioners, and me in particular, because I'm really honored to be a part of this process, and I learned so much. All of the field hearings we had were incredible. When we were at the Cleveland Clinic, hearing those doctors and nurses and scientists talk about how they're changing public health for the better using the power of machine learning and algorithmic technologies, it was incredible. It was just a really refreshing reminder why this is so important. So thank you for that. So the Chamber report focuses heavily on governance structures, but begins with some overarching principles or policy pillars of the importance of efficiency, neutrality, proportionality, collaboration, and flexibility as sort of key values that will drive the governance process. And then continues on to recommend 5 key principles for AI policy and regulation. I'll summarize them very briefly. The first 2 and the last 2 fit very nicely together. The first 2 are evaluate applicable existing law and regulation, and then fill gaps in existing law while avoiding statutory or regulatory overreach. Pretty straightforward recommendation. There was a lot of discussion from witnesses and others talking about the existing legal infrastructure and regulatory infrastructure we already have in this country that can handle a lot of concerns about algorithmic technologies. And then there was also discussion from many about the other needs we might have because of the unique attributes or issues surrounding algorithmic technologies. That led to a third recommendation about the importance of assuming a risk-based approach to AI regulation and enforcement, understanding that not all risks are created equal.
You know, what may happen with a little a voice translation AI-enabled tool is very different than what might happen with a biometric tool or something else. There are differences, important differences associated with different algorithmic capabilities. And this is also something that's shared in common with a lot of international governments that are looking at AI policy, the importance of separating high risk from other types of risks. Of course, the devil's in the details. That's really, really complicated, and that was a topic of discussion. But we have to begin with the premise that we need to be specific about what risks we're talking about. The fourth and the fifth recommendations on principles for AI policy were, fourth, distribute but coordinate AI regulation. The fifth was encourage private sector approaches to risk assessment innovation. This is very much consistent with the important work that NIST has been doing with its risk management framework. And there was a lot of consistency, I think, among those who testified and others to start with the good things we've already got on the ground. Our two able co-chairs discussed just a moment ago how Congress and policy moves very slowly, but technology moves very fast. In the academic literature, this is called the pacing problem, and the pacing problem is a relentless reality of modern emerging technology policy. And you have to have some backup plans. You've got to have a vision for like what fills governance gaps. A lot of the work that the Chamber Commission did and a lot of the experts we heard from talked about the importance of a collaborative approach and building on multi-stakeholder processes, existing tools, and then finding all the excellent work that's already been done by professional associations, trade associations, ethical organizations, academic groups, and so many others to build upon those frameworks to try to construct a policy vision that in the interim, until we get other types of formal policies, will help guide us towards a better, safer end for algorithmic innovation.
Appreciate that. Brent, if you would like to go through the workforce.
Sure. First, I just want to say I was really encouraged as somebody who spent the last 25 years of my life thinking about workforce, how much time and energy this commission put in to this topic of what do we think the labor impacts are going to be and what should we do about them. So having said that, there's a lot in this report on workforce, and I'm not going to try to cover all of it. The first thing I think that's worth noting is that the stories of an AI-led demise of work are greatly exaggerated. As has been true throughout the history of automation, this type of technological improvement is likely to increase the size of the economy, improve efficiency and productivity, raise incomes, and increase demand for all types of goods and services, including a lot of things that we can't yet envision. So that's part one. Part two is, given the squeeze that we're facing right now on the workforce side in terms of labor shortages and demographic aging, just this morning I saw a number astounding. Between 2005 and 2012, the U.S. labor force grew by 11.5 million. Between 2017 and 2022, it grew by 1.7 million. We cannot sustain growth in this economy if we don't have improvements to productivity and efficiency. AI is going to be an absolutely critical part of this. I think it's looking more and more to me like this is extremely well timed for the future of growth. This is not the same thing as saying that AI is 100% upside for every worker everywhere all the time. It's not. It's going to have a number of challenges in it, and there's a risk, as one of our witnesses said, one of the big risks is that people start working for AI instead of AI working with people. I think that's exactly right. Keeping humans in charge is extremely important, and especially in these early stages where we've already seen, how things can go wrong and the need to stay ahead of that. So where are we going? As Yogi Berra said, predictions are very difficult, especially about the future. AI looks like a general purpose technology. Some jobs will be eliminated, and many more will change dramatically as skill demands rise. Both kinds of change are hard, and we need to prepare now for upskilling and reskilling current workers. Preparing for this kind of change has a number of components. In the report, we talk about the need for better labor market forecasting tools to help guide students, schools, students, workers, and businesses, especially those most exposed to AI automation. And we're doing a project at the American Enterprise Institute on that. So that will be forthcoming, some recommendations on that. This information will be critical to helping students and incumbent workers prepare. For displaced workers, and there are going to be displaced workers, we need to have programs and resources on hand to support their transition. We did not do a great job on this in the post-NAFTA world, even though most of the trade impacts or the automation impacts were much greater than the trade impacts, but we haven't done a great job on that. And we need to be looking at programs like the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program, but adjusted to focus on automation rather than trade. And the more significant the impact of AI, the greater the need for those programs will be. We need to look at tax policy to rebalance incentives away from labor replacement and towards policies that support integration of human and machine labor. These types of business investments were treated equally when we reformed the tax code in '86, but now substantially prefer non-human capital investment, and that needs to be reviewed. Finally, we need to get smart about technology education. Learn to code was always bad advice, and it certainly hasn't gotten better with the advent of these tools that are going to automate coding. What students and workers need is digital technology education and how to understand, interact with, and use AI technology. That's one half of this double helix that I like to talk about in terms of the future of workforce preparation. The other half of this is that those technical skills and the use of AI need to be balanced with higher levels of soft or non-cognitive skills that help shift people toward the human-facing tasks that AI is less well-suited to. These types of skills are also the foundation of learning and adaptation and will improve cognitive flexibility in the face of technological dynamism. And as has already been said here this morning, opportunities and challenges usually come in the same package, and that's certainly the case with AI and work. We all, policymakers, students, workers, and businesses, have a role to play in making this future work.
Thank you, Brent. Chris, if you would like to go through the global competitiveness and national security piece of the report.
Sure, certainly. And first of all, it's been a real honor and pleasure to be a part of this commission, and thank you to you and all the colleagues at the Chamber who have overseen it. There's a few things I'd like to say here. The first, though, is actually I'm going to go slightly off script and really reinforce the value of the inclusive workforce to national security. I feel very comfortable saying that, and I want to say this in light of there's been, I would say, a spirited political debate over the last week or so after the first notice of funding came out with the CHIPS Act about whether there was some kind of tension between an inclusive workforce and our national security. And I want to just say, not only do we not view not only do we not think that there is a tension there, we view an inclusive workforce as essential to our national security, and something that I think our national security is best served by having as inclusive a workforce as possible in it. And so I want to just kind of applaud the work that Brent and other commissioners did on our workforce team. And I think it has really served the national security piece of the commission as well. As far as the actual kind of national security recommendations that we made, I would kind of put them in two camps. And here, there's kind of a set of recommendations that have to do with establishing global standards for kind of responsible use, or as we put it at one place in the report, expanding the responsible AI pathway. And there, I think I'm glad to say that, when you do these kind of launch events, oftentimes the impact is what's supposed to come after the report has come out. In this case, some of the impact, I think, has actually been kind of socialized during the process of holding these hearings and having a robust set of conversations around what expanding the responsible AI pathway would look like. And fortunately, I think there's been a lot of progress since our last hearing and even today in that regard, where a few weeks ago you had the State Department release a political statement about what they're looking for from the global community when it comes to responsible use of AI and autonomous weapons in the national security space. The NATO's been starting to discuss a code of conduct for AI and autonomous weapons. The U.S., I think, thankfully, has been kind of playing a leading role where we were out in front in terms of developing principles. We've kind of established the responsible pathway in the first place. And I think we're now kind of socializing it globally in a way that is really encouraging and heartening to see, and I think something that to the recommendations that we made in the report and that just came out, hopefully that will be something that will be expanded on even further. There's been a lot of progress the last couple of months, but hopefully we'll be able to lean into that and have even more progress in the months and years to come. The second part of that, that there's also been a lot of progress, is including allies and partners in securing our global competitiveness and national security. And there, I would again say that it's been, when we started these conversations a year ago, that we were kind of at an inflection point where we weren't really sure, what role the U.S. would play and how far we could bring our allies in some of this. And I think there's been a lot of work, again, that's come out in the last couple of months that I think has underscored the recommendations in their support, and that hopefully we can build on, in particular around things like export controls for, certain kind of cutting-edge semiconductor manufacturing equipment, where there's been a lot of progress with our counterparts in the Netherlands and in Japan, and kind of a lot of robust alliance building and coalition building between our country and theirs, and between kind of some of the leading firms in the United States and other leading firms abroad. So we applaud that, and we hope that it will continue to expand. The last kind of section of recommendations that I would flag are ones that I think are still under development, and that I think hopefully we can see a lot more progress on. Some of these are just particular to the U.S. For example, kind of one thing that we flagged that I think we are going to have to do a lot of work around is moving past the kind of data silos within the Pentagon, for example, where we've got 4 different branches. We have a lot of different systems. We have a procurement system that rewards kind of end-to-end, system development. AI is not a vertical. It's horizontally distributed. The data is horizontally distributed. We need to kind of fundamentally re-architect how we collect and use data across our national security enterprise and defense enterprise. And that's going to be a long, ongoing challenge. We also still, I think, despite all the progress that's been made over the last decade, need to kind of push out on improving our procurement processes and acquisition processes so that we can bring in the vitality of Silicon Valley and our tech sector into the national security industrial base, and give it heightened prominence, even compared to how far it's come in the last few years. And then the last one I would point where there's a number of recommendations we make, and I really want to underscore, is the AI. The U.S. has a real leading role to play here around promoting AI safety in particular, and testing and evaluation. And here, I think the events of the last month have, I think, underscored the need for this, where we are operating in a geopolitical context that is so low trust. We do not have room for an accident. There is simply no room for an accident. If some of our competitors unveil technology that is not safe, and they say it was used accidentally, we are going to be hard-pressed to believe them that it was an accident. Conversely, if we use a system and there's an unintended use of force that unfortunately harms a geopolitical rival, they will not believe us that it was an accident, no matter what information we provide. We've seen this in the past. We've been able to get through it in the past because the environment was such that it wasn't so low trust that it immediately led to escalation. I am very worried that given the trajectory that the U.S. and China in particular are on, if there is an accident, or if there's an AI-enabled military application or system that is used accidentally and there's a lethal use of force, it will be very hard to recover from that and to de-escalate that. And the way around that is to invest even more heavily than we have in testing and evaluation and making sure that our systems are as safe as possible. When you say this, everybody kind of nods along and says, well, you know, of course, who wouldn't want their system to be safe? When we're saying this, we're saying we actually need to spend money on it, right? Which means it's going to be some difficult decisions about how we allocate funding. And we're going to have to prioritize testing and evaluation and safety ahead of some other considerations at points. And that's kind of, if we do that, I'm confident we can kind of navigate the choppy geopolitical waters ahead, but it's going to require some foresight on our end and some courage to stick to those commitments. So I'll pause there, but and thank you again for all the great work.
Absolutely, Chris. Again, this is just kind of scratching the surface on the recommendations that they have put out in today's report. But I think at this time, I would like to call both Congressman Delaney and Congressman Ferguson back up so that we can have some questions and answers from the audience.
So with that, we want to, obviously, transparency has been a great word that has gone throughout this report. We want to be transparent and open up to questions from the audience if you all have any. So our two co-chairs are here, our commissioners are here. So I'll go ahead and open up the floor if any folks have any questions.
Wait, hold on, sorry, you have to speak into here so people on the screen can hear.
Doug Johnson, CTA. When you did these field hearings and went to several states, did you happen to hear from state lawmakers, policymakers, regulators, legislators about their views, expectations, or ambitions when it came to developing the actual policies?
You know, I'm trying to remember right now. I know it's in one of the appendices, I think, the list of every witness that we heard from. And I'm trying to recall right now if we did hear from them. But I know that John and I have relationships, and all of our commissioners have different relationships and have commonly worked with state, local elected officials, other policymakers. And it was one of the things we wanted to make sure we did was, as we were inviting and requesting folks to participate in the process, we cast a wide net. Like anybody who had an interest or an expertise here that they felt like needed to be shared was shared. And that's always the best way. I remember in the policymaking process, that's always the best way to do it. That's the way our policymaking system is designed, right? Hear from as many voices as possible and then try to bring those together, find consensus, argue it out sometimes, and then try to see if there's a common ground that we can kind of coalesce around. So I guess I don't have a specific answer to your question, but we can certainly find that out, or I don't recall, unless someone else has a more specific memory on this.
The name escapes me right now, but we did have the former member of the Ohio House who introduced the privacy legislation the year before, who came in and testified at our Cleveland hearing at the Cleveland Clinic. So we did hear from folks who had experience in that front too. Any other questions?
Hi, Chris Donahoe with Edelman Smithfield. You guys have clearly thought deeply about the risk of business adoption and innovation outpacing the policy and legal constructs. So my question is, what advice or recommendations do you have for the business community and business leaders in terms of how they can help close that gap? In particular, for a lot of business executives who are just now beginning to engage in a real way with this technology and integrate it into their own work?
I'll start. I would say two things. First, and this one of the things that came out of our work was that there are currently a significant numbers of regulations and laws that can actually be applied to artificial intelligence and machine learning. meaning laws that were framed before this innovation but are applicable. And I think one of our recommendations is to make sure policymakers are enforcing those and updating those, right away, even before new policy making. So I think business leaders would be prudent to think about the inventory of existing regulations and how they might apply to the work they're doing in this area, and make sure they're operating within the scope of how these things the current tools could be applied. The second thing I think business leaders should do is, there's that Wayne Gretzky expression, you should skate to where the puck is going. It's pretty obvious where the puck is going on some of this stuff. There have been advances at state levels to put in place various privacy regulations, things like that. The European Union has done a lot of work on this. And we talk about this in a report, you could see how some of this work will settle one day into federal regulation, and you'd be surprised that it doesn't. So I think industry should start adopting that as best practices so that they're prepared. And I always do think it's very important for business to have a voice at the table. And if they think prudent regulation is needed, because they want to operate in a way that is responsible, and they want to make sure their competition is operating in a way that's responsible, they should be leading not only with industry groups in creating voluntary industry standards, but also in advocating policymakers to actually do their job and start getting some of this stuff done. So, so if I was running a business that's impacted by this, I would say, okay, what currently exists that apply, and even if people aren't thinking of it in that way, people will one day figure out, hey, we could use this tool, et cetera. I'd be operating with that in mind. And the second thing I'd be doing is thinking about where this is going to go, what's obvious, and encouraging my industry group and policymakers to get there sooner than later.
Yeah, if I can add one thing to what the Congressman said, page 89 of the final report, the Commission recommends that government work with industry to encourage development of industry standards and best practices around AI governance. And we heard a lot from and stressed the important work that's been done by professional associations such as IEEE, ISO, ACM, and others who've already developed some really wonderful ethical guidelines and best practices for baking in safety, privacy, security by design, keeping humans in the loop along the way in thinking about broad-based AI governance. The role of the government there can be very much sort of multi-stakeholder process oriented. The NTIA and NIST have done amazing work in this regard across multiple administrations in a bipartisan fashion. The Obama administration, NTIA, did wonderful work starting down this process, and the Trump administration continued it. Those administrations didn't agree on much, but they had a common approach to sort of consensus building and collaboration around multi-stakeholder efforts, sometimes referred to as soft law and other frames, co-regulation, so on and so forth. This is a really good model. It's, again, a gap filler, and the Commission recommends that the government industry continue to work together to highlight those best practices and maybe try to help formalize them in a better fashion.
Jordan, I'll just add an example I use sometimes when we talk about the interplay between government policy or guardrails and private industry and their freedom to be able to operate, right? It's the image I like to think about is, you're climbing a mountain and you're on one of these paths on the side of the mountain. And there's a cliff, right? If there's no fence, if there's no guardrail on that, it's frightening. You stay far away from that edge, right? You actually don't have the freedom to use the whole path, right? But if there's a guardrail, if there's a fence, something sturdy, that is thoughtful and was put there with thought and foresight, it actually gives you more freedom, because then you can use the whole path. You can walk right up to the edge of that path and not have fear of falling over, right? So thoughtful, prudent guardrails and rules of the road actually increase freedom. They don't decrease it. And that's, I think, a helpful way to think about it if it's done in the proper way and if it's done in a partnership.
Hi, Addie Cook with Google. I'm curious to hear, and one, thanks so much for this really comprehensive report. I'm really looking forward to reading it. I'm curious if you guys looked up and down the stack and maybe who you sort of spoke with from like maybe the AI startup community. Obviously, a lot of times the focus is on sort of the bigger tech providers, but one of the things that came out of a survey recently in Europe was the impact that sort of regulatory regimes that are sort of focused on the big players might actually have on smaller players in the market, you know, on different parts of the stack. So I'm curious if your report looked into that at all, if you got any feedback on that in the United States context.
Well, the short answer is yes, we looked at that. We were very mindful of the need to ensure U.S. competitiveness as it relates to these technologies. And you can't ensure U.S. competitiveness unless you're actually fostering an environment where the small startup innovators, the people in the garage, can actually make a mark. So we were mindful of that, and it was also, we used a term throughout the report to think about regulation as necessary. And you know, with a view that if you over-regulate, particularly with a centralized approach, which we also recommend against to some extent, that doesn't mean there couldn't be instances where that's appropriate. But in general, as Michael said, since AI is permeating the entire economy, we have regulatory frameworks to regulate various parts of the economy. They should similarly be charged with thinking about AI in the context of what their subject matter or sector is. So we were very mindful that a top-down, centralized, broad-based approach that, let's face it, would be animated by people's views of Google and Facebook and Amazon and Microsoft, that could have a stifling effect on innovation. And so we were mindful of that. We're also mindful of the fact that we do have these very large technology companies. We need to make sure they're not operating in a way that is stifling of innovation, right? So I think we looked at those issues kind of hand in hand to some extent. I don't know, Michael, if you have anything.
Hi, Avi Philly. I work at Credo AI. We're a responsible AI governance platform, and thanks to the Chamber for this report and for the opportunity to testify. We were at the July field hearing. So my question relates to the recommendation on updating existing regulation. I think in the report there's a reference to updating state-level revenge porn legislation to include consideration of deep fakes. Are there other regulations at the state or federal level that are existing and on the books which the Commission considered for updating and filling in these gaps to account for artificial intelligence?
Briefly, between pages about 80 and 83 of the report, there's some discussion about filling some of those gaps. There's some discussion about federal baseline privacy legislation, some state activity. There was a lot of discussion on the Commission, including among a number of witnesses, about impact assessment approaches and auditing approaches. There's still a lot of discussion about that. As the Congressman mentioned, we recommended more of an as-needed, as-necessary approach, filling the gaps, but there is a recommendation to require impact assessments for higher risk AI uses. Of course, the devil's in the details about what's high risk, and the European Union has one vision on that. That's sort of a lot of stuff's going into that bucket pretty quickly, and the regulation's flying pretty quick there. I think there's going to be more of a slower response here that basically is more thoughtful in thinking about what are the really concrete harms or risks, especially now that NIST has got the framework. The Chamber report builds upon that framework to say, let's identify these and be clear about what really necessitates that sort of intervention. And then, you know, maybe we'll get to a regime that has more of a auditing or impact assessment transparency requirement. And again, there's going to be quite a debate about that. The Commission did not come to, you know, everyone did not agree exactly how that regime would work. But for high risk uses, I think there's a lot of agreement that you have to have some greater transparency.
Thank you so much. My name is Alicia. I work for Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester. And my question is somewhat related to that, and kind of with the continuing and growing problem of disinformation and misinformation and AI's definite potential to accelerate that issue. Did you engage with experts and people working on policy recommendations related to disinformation and being mindful of free speech and these considerations? Is that somewhat outside the scope of the report, or is that something that you plan to look further into with AI's role in disinformation?
Well, I'll just say briefly, that worked its way into many of our conversations, many witnesses, because that has the potential to impact so many of the applications of AI, right? And some of it is inconvenient, some of it is dangerous, right? So it kind of goes to some of our broader points. This is one area, one of many areas where there's real potential risk. And I don't think any of us are sort of the mind that our plan or recommendations or other government policy is going to solve every challenge that's out there when it comes to AI. It's probably never going to happen, right? I mean, we see that in other areas of technology. As soon as you solve a problem, something else crops up. It's the nature of innovation, right? Something good crops up, and then something bad probably crops up too, right? So that's just a part of that process. But the short answer is that animated a lot of our conversations, because that can happen in just about any of the applications where you see AI or could potentially see AI. So it's a real concern. I don't know if others want to add to that too.
We heard from several witnesses who talked about disinformation concerns, but once again, I'll go back to the phrase, the devil's in the details, and people have sometimes very different conceptions of what counts as disinformation, and it's a particularly politically charged matter these days between different people in different parties, and so I think it's a problem that was identified. There aren't concrete recommendations about it here. There's a lot in a 120-page report, but we can't cover everything. But there was a recognition that the issue is there, but also that there's a lot more discussion to be had. And so much of the debate about how to deal with algorithmic disinformation is building upon an existing, like, what is social media disinformation and digital disinformation. We didn't try to unpack all of that, because that would be a 120-page report in its own regard.
Right, we all know where this can go, right? The technologies exist where a video could be created of this press conference, and it could have all of us in it, and it could have me coming to the podium saying, our recommendation is that we seize all private property, and it could have Michael coming to the podium and saying, my recommendation is that we do away with the government. And it would look real, and it could get spread, and people could say, these are exactly what I think of Democrats and Republicans. Do you see what I mean? So we all know this is a huge problem. It came up throughout our testimony, and that clearly has to be addressed in all aspects of our society. And again, that was really not the purview of our report is really about, in some ways, observing that this is happening all across our society. These technologies are changing things for the good and the bad, and we need a framework for how to address it, as opposed to actually making a recommendation on a specific solution to that issue.
Hi, I'm Angel Presta with Intel Corporation. Thank you. My question is around bolstering global competitiveness, and I wonder how the EU AI Act came into play, during your process, especially in terms of other geos and countries looking to it as kind of the established regulation in this space.
We have an expert on that.
I think we certainly kind of tried to establish a way of thinking about this issue that was taking into account what was happening around the world globally. I think the EU AI Act in particular, and kind of the risk framework that it's introducing, the risk assessments that it's introducing, we probably paid more attention, I would say, to kind of the NIST's risk-based approach and their risk framework. I think there was, there's a section in the report that kind of walks through some of the different AI approaches. So we certainly kind of use it to inform what we were doing, but I don't think that we kind of argued aggressively for kind of adopting the EU's approach there. It's got a very, I would say that there's two issues with the EU AI Act, where one, it's very horizontal as opposed to kind of vertical and looking at sector by sector, whereas I think among the commissioners, we're probably a little bit more on the side of the approach that the U.S. seems to be leaning towards, of just kind of a more sector by sector, use case by use case approach. And then the other was just kind of the preemptive risk assessments. We had, I think, a robust discussion around what we thought on that. I might actually kick it to you, Adam, in terms of, how we were thinking about those discussions.
Yeah, sure. Well, I just want to say that there was, if there was an area where there was sort of like violent consensus on the commission about anything, it was actually about investment and immigration issues, I think. There was a lot of discussion about the importance of investing in next generation AI and robotic technologies for global competitiveness purposes. I may have been the softest person on that one, worried about like some of the industrial policy stuff, but I think there is a lot of consensus in the report about the importance of making sure we invest properly in those sectors. The second, on immigration, if you think about what was the secret sauce that powered the digital revolution in the United States, talented people, right? And some of the most talented people globally came here seeking out opportunity in the United States. We want to continue that success story. And, we need to have smart immigration policies. And on pages 54 and 55 of the final report, we talk about the need to attract and retain global AI talent, beginning with sensible immigration reform. I think that was like a slam dunk consensus opinion on this commission. And we know how politically charged that issue can get. But if you want to talk about one of the core ways to achieve global competitiveness relative to the rest of the world, that's got to be number one.
I think we have time for one more question if we have any.
Hello, my name is Benjamin Harvey. I'm currently the founder and CEO of AI Squared, but also a professor and the director of Trustworthy AI Systems Program over at George Washington University. So my question is, so I worked at NSA, the National Security Agency, for about 10 years, and okay, yeah. So again, my name is Benjamin Harvey, founder and CEO of AI Squared, but also a professor and the director of designing trustworthy AI systems at George Washington University. So I worked at the National Security Agency for about 10 years, and one of the things that we're seeing right now in industry is really a race when you think about large language models as well as conversational AI, right? To see who can get it out there first, but also with regards to where the adoption happens across different customer segments. But in the intelligence community, what you see is really the exact opposite. So the risk that are associated with deploying AI before you actually understand the actual risk, you see a very low amount of AI and machine learning being deployed in mission production applications. So how do we, the question is, as we're thinking about, AI policy, governance, risk, and security, how do we approach that in a way in the federal government and the intelligence community so that we're not completely stifling mission or handicapping mission, but we're still able to start to see the efficiency and the productivity gains across the intelligence community?
It's a big question.
Yeah, I would, echo that is a huge question, but I think where you'll see probably the most progress quickly, I would say would probably be in the intelligence. When it comes to kind of the conversational AI that you were mentioning, or the natural language processing AI, there's a lot of opportunity to kind of bake in those kinds of large language models for the to address the basic challenge, which is that the quantity of information in the open source realm and in the kind of classified realm is increasing exponentially, but you can only add human beings linearly, right? And so the only way to kind of go through all that information and make sure that you're finding the needle in the haystack is to leverage better and better large language models. You need to do it though with kind of guardrails to know that those systems aren't perfect and that you've got redundancy and resilience built in. But I think that's probably where there's already been some movement, and there will continue to be a lot more. I think in general, the higher level question of how do you get the need to innovate within the intelligence and national security establishment while also maintaining kind of safe and secure systems? That's something that again we kind of talked about with the report, and is also part of again why we emphasize safety and testing and evaluation and all of that as well. I think you need to do. We can't afford to sit still and kind of sit on our hands, but we also need to be as responsible as we can in thinking through how to apply these technologies. And I will say, I think as others have here, I've kind of ended this process a little bit more optimistic than I started, actually, in the sense that I think there's been a lot of conversation around constructive ways forward to navigate that balance of innovation and safety and security. And I think there's been a lot of advances on how to actually get that balance right. And so hopefully we'll be able to lean into that in the future.
Well, I think we've come to the end of our program today, but it's only the beginning for the advocacy that gets done on artificial intelligence based on this report. Actually, we'll be in Austin, Texas on Monday with former Congressman Hurd and members of the AI Commission to talk about the report at the Austin Chamber on Monday the 13th. And we're going to continue that advocacy going forward the months ahead. First of all, I want to thank our co-chairs for their leadership, our commissioners. Also look in your pamphlet as well to see the other commissioners who participated. We had a really great think tank of our own within this commission. Also want to thank Michael Richards for his expertise and leadership, as well as the leadership of David Hirschman and Tom Quaadman here at the Chamber. But thanks for joining us, and there's work to be done. Thank you.